All right, excellent. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us. This is our second marketing webinar of the term called Using Research to Develop Marketing Strategies. My name is Melina Eden, and I am the marketing lead faculty here at SNHU, and I'm also your host for the evening. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the role of research in marketing, and we're going to be looking at how companies use different types of primary and secondary research to gather information, and then how that research is used to shape marketing activities. The structure of our meeting tonight, like last week and like all of these, is informal, and we do welcome your questions throughout the presentation using the chat feature. We will leave some time for questions at the end, but please do feel free to add in your questions as we go so we can make sure that we get to everyone. And at this time, I would like to ask our guest speaker to please introduce himself tonight. So, Pat.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to tonight's uh, event. I didn't realize it was being recorded, though. My goodness, I have to watch my behavior. Um, my name is Pat McGraw, and I've been teaching here at Southern New Hampshire about 4 years now, I believe. Intro to marketing, marketing research, and direct marketing primarily. Um, got my start in marketing about 30 years ago, back in the early 80s, when I was still an undergrad at Arizona State University. I had the good fortune of getting an internship at their Department of Public Events, which was a fancy name for their, the department that ran all the sporting events and all of the entertainment events. And they had a 3,000 seat arena, a 17,000 seat building, and then a stadium that seats about 70,000. And we did everything from chamber music to off-Broadway traveling shows to rock concerts, featuring the Rolling Stones and some other well-known groups. And my role was to help identify acts that were on the road that would sell tickets and fill up our facilities in order to not only entertain the students and the community, but make a little bit of money. And that's really where I cut my teeth on market research, was trying to find out uh, who was being drawn to what type of events and which ones would get the most support, and try to gauge how to make some money that way. Um, Over the years, I'd say my career has been in two pieces, two halves. First half, marketing on both the agency and client side, pretty much industry agnostic. Technology, business services, travel, consumer services, small, medium, and large companies, privately owned, publicly traded. IBM and Microsoft are some of the bigger names, and then mom and dad companies along the way. And what I found early on in that part of my career, especially on the smaller businesses, that it was you had limitless opportunities and limited resources. So it was really important to be able to know a little bit more about your market and your competition and your audience in order to be effective with those resources and be able to achieve the goals that the company had set. Um, so I did that kind of out of a self-preservation mode. The first few jobs I had out of college were um, smaller businesses where the owner had a dream, which was their service, their product, and didn't have an awful lot of insight into their audience. And we went out with a couple of campaigns in order to generate business, and they didn't work. So we had to figure out, were we targeting the wrong people? Did we use the right media? Did we have the right messaging and the offers? Or did we have the wrong products and the wrong pricing? And were we selling through the wrong channels? So I did a lot of research in my early career in order to make sure that I had the right information to drive promotional efforts. The second half of my career, I've been working exclusively in the education sector, working with colleges and universities and ed tech companies. And an awful lot of the schools that I work with, it's the same story that I just described. Um, they think that their target audience on a traditional college for traditional undergraduate school students is an 18 to 24-year-old, and that's about as deep as they get into it. And it's rather much more segmented than that. So in order to be effective and help them with recruiting students, or the technology firms helping them sell their technology into schools, it's good to know who you're going after. So, long story short, been at it about 30 years and have been involved on the research side in order to help drive the promotional efforts and also identify product opportunities and pricing opportunities as well for employers and clients. So that's me in a very large nutshell. I think it really came. Let me even try this one different. I don't think I've worked with more than two companies in 30 years that have a marketing research budget. Most of them look at it as an expense, and they've had bad results for a variety of reasons we could get into if you'd like after this gets done. But um, and so what happens is you go in there and you're looking for, okay, I need information, and you start turning to the people that are around you. And for me, it was the customer service staff, and it was the sales team. If we were interviewing people and I found out they worked for a competitor, if I went to a conference or a trade show, I was at the competitor's booth. So it was secondary research that allowed me to get some really good information cheaply and be able to show people how I could use it in order to get their trust so that when I asked for a budget to do primary, they had faith in me that it was going to be something that came back and produced some results. The other side of the coin is one thing I learned really early in my career is a lot of companies will say, let's do a survey in reaction to something that's gone wrong. For example, we didn't hit our sales goal. Let's do a survey and ask our customers why they didn't do it. And it's informative, but it's not actionable. So a lot of the people that I've worked with early on had that experience. I just paid $20,000 for a survey, and I've got nothing that I can change because of it. Um, and so it was a waste of $20,000. So I'm not going to ever budget for it again. So for me, it was secondary research was picking the brains of other people, paying attention to the news, um, reading the newspaper about the competition and realizing, connecting the dots, knowing that, hey, wait a minute, competitor A is moving from a small warehouse to a larger warehouse and they're hiring 50 more people. Something's going on over there and we need to know what's going on. And then being able to prove to the senior management team that this is helping make better decisions and helping us sell more product and or lower costs so that then they'd finance the primary research later on. Does that help? Mhm. Well, I think um, I'm a realist, and no one's ever accused me of being an optimist. And many have accused me of being a pessimist. But I always walk into situations knowing that perfection is something that you're chasing, but you're never going to attain. And that means that there's always opportunities for improvement. So walking into a new situation, I'm looking for and keeping my eyes and ears open for problems. Um, and again, that's where talking with the sales team, talking with the customer service folks, going out and meeting with the clients, and asking what do we do well, what do we do poorly, and what don't we do that you wish we did. In just informal ways is a great way to sit there and identify opportunities for research because then you're trying to solve a problem. Um, for example, the salespeople are saying that we can't overcome our biggest competitor in the marketplace is just killing us. They're beating us on 7 out of 10 proposals, and we just can't figure out how to overcome them. Well, then it's a matter of sitting down and going, okay, how do I solve that problem with research? Let me look at what their proposals are if you can get a copy from the client. Let me look at what your proposals are. Let's talk to the client about what their expectations were and what their criteria was for making the decision. And at that point, as you can see, you're now solving a problem and helping somebody become more successful. And I think that's probably the best way to start it off when you get into a new marketing position, a new job, a new company. Yeah. Well, I'll even take it back a step if I could. Before I even start the work, I make sure that the scope of the project is detailed and is agreed upon by the key people. Um, for a variety of reasons, um, I've watched too many situations where a person has walked in to present something, and and someone in the room who has a different agenda um, will come out with a question. Well, where did you get that? And as soon as that person says, well, I got it from this method. Oh, well, I have no faith in that data. And then you get into an argument over the value of all the work that was done. So the first most important thing is get the right people into the room and say flat out, is this everybody? And this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and these are the sources of information we're going to use. Does anybody have any problems with it? If I come back to you with data and recommendations based on that data from these sources in the way I just described, are you going to be okay? You may be shocked, but are you going to be okay with what I'm saying? And once you get that consensus, then go on out and do the work. And then when you come back in, it's remind them, this is what we agreed to, this is what the scenario was, this is the problems that we were trying to solve, the questions we were trying to answer, and here's how we did it. And then, for example, you mentioned target audience or using the right media. For me, it's always let's move it into the test phase. Let's I want to word this the right way. I come from a direct marketing background where you would test on a regular basis the lists that you were going after, the message that you were using, the offer that was there. So you would have a board with all these boxes in it that showed you anywhere from 25 to 50 different tests or more that were going on in any campaign. And so I would sit down and say, let's go and test this type of criteria for a list. and this type of messaging and this type of offer, and maybe it would be 5 to 10% of the budget for the campaign. That way you're still going out with 80 to 90% of your budget to what you have been doing and what has been working, but you've got a big enough test to then come back with the results and say, hey, you know what, that performed better than what we have been doing. Let's try it on a larger group and see if we can continue to improve it. And eventually you go and you roll it out. If it beats the current champion, the control package that everybody's been using, and you shift things around. I was with a company early in my career back in Phoenix that was a business to consumer technology company. They sold computer hardware and software to consumers, and this was back in the good old early days where a laptop weighed about 50 pounds and looked like an old sewing machine that you carried around, and it cost $3,000 to $4,000. And we realized that we were going to go broke serving the consumer market because they kept coming back with technical questions, and I'm using air quotes here, telling me that their cup holder on their desktop computer wasn't working. And it wasn't a cup holder, it was their CD-ROM drive, and they were using it as a cup holder. And it was that type of a client that was just going to eat our margins up with hand-holding and service. So the company made a decision. Businesses were beginning to go and automate, and everybody was getting a desktop on their desk, and they had IT groups that were handling all that hand-holding stuff. So we were going to shift from consumer to a business market. But we had to do it gradually because we realized quickly large corporations weren't really going to be good for us because they were buying in such large volume, the margins weren't there, and we would never hit the profit margin goals that we had set. Too small of a business wasn't going to buy enough, and they didn't have the IT department. So we had to find that mid-tier, and we had to test with them on the messaging that was going to work. And do things like that. So there was a slow rollout and a lot of testing that went on. It wasn't something where you turned one faucet off and turned another one on, if that makes sense. Most definitely, and I think that's another bad thing about the way so many firms look at research today is it's a one-off project to address an issue. And it really needs to be an ongoing part of the business because change is going on all the time. Um, Society is going through changes, the economy is going through changes, your competition's changing. We got look at now, we've got a new president and a new Congress that are changing certain laws from the past administration that's going to have an impact on businesses. All that's part of research. And being able to stay on top of all those things and be able to say, was it about 7 years ago? Society went through a change where no one was eating carbs. It was the Atkins diet, and bakers just about disappeared. Bread lines disappeared. About 3 or 4 or 5 years later, that change in society, people started craving carbs again, and then you saw an uptick in artisanal bakers. And you had to be able to stay on top of those changes in the world outside of the business because they have such a huge impact on your own business. And then you've got the changes inside. You've got new staff, you've got new technology that allows you to do different things or more things more effectively internally. That has an impact on your strategies and your offerings too. So definitely, research needs to be an ongoing part of the process because you can't afford to shut your eyes and your ears to what's going on around you because next thing you know, you're going to get sideswiped and you're going to get really hurt dramatically from competition or some other things. Um, it was funny. Uh, about 2 years ago, when it really started popping up, it started popping up because articles being written by data companies. Um, I, the people that I work with, the companies that I work with, um, they need to focus on little data, on basic blocking and tackling. Little things like when a prospective customer calls in to place an order or they fill out a form on the website, that it actually goes into the right files on the system so that someone can follow up and then continue to add the right data to it. And at some point, I can open up my file and say, I called on the 15th of January and I placed a $100 order for these two products. I work with companies right now that can't do that. And it's difficult for them to figure out what advertisement led to the purchase by that person. And that's something, if you grew up in direct mail, that's something that you probably can relate to, because I knew, well, for example, that company I mentioned back in Phoenix, the technology company, we had over 8,000 toll-free numbers that we rotated through so that every campaign that we did had its own unique 800 number. And that meant that when that phone rang, that campaign got credit for that sale when the person made a purchase. Today, people still struggle with that. Now, when it comes to big data, you know, a lot of it is, especially about a year or two ago, was tied back to taking everything from social media that you hear, like on Twitter, all the data there, and trying to sift through it to find out if they're talking about you and what they're saying about you, and if it's a large number of people or if it's a small number of people, and then there you've got it. And that to me is, that would be like sprinkles on a cake. If I could ever get to that, that would be a nice thing to have. But right now, let's focus on the basics. So with my clients, it's really, how do we capture name, address, phone number, and make sure that we tie everything that they do following up to that account. As far as big data is concerned, I think it's great, and it has been proven to be very effective for things like disease and cancer, and going through all the data that, from medical records in order to look at patterns and things like that, or for feeding hungry people when you start looking at all the different data that comes in on crop yields and the air quality and the weather, and the availability of machinery and all that. You start bringing all that kind of data in, like NASA will do when it's bringing in data from satellites, and it's analyzing all that. That's where big data is going to be just huge. But for most of us, we're not going to work with a company that's got a couple of hardcore statisticians sitting there drooling over all this data trying to run regression analysis. It's going to be the basic blocking and tackling of, let me get your contact information straight so I can send the bill to the right address so I can get paid.
No, and I think that's a really great point, that it's almost as though big data, there's a certain group or certain groups that it's going to be a real benefit for, but especially for smaller organizations, it almost could be a distraction at times.
Yeah, most definitely. It was almost, for a certain period of time there was a lot of what I'll call mid-sized companies, 100 to $900 million in revenue, a couple hundred employees, that were looking and reading at all what was going on with big data and going, oh my God, we're missing the boat, and we need to go that direction. And then they finally, somebody sent most of them down and said, could you focus on the basics first, and we'll get to that later on. But keep your eyes on the prize. There's more to be done now with just some basic stuff with the little data that you got.
No, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things, as we're talking about, how we find information, right? And then, of course, what we've been talking about, sort of what we do with it. What is, can you provide just a couple of sort of tricks or hints or tips on how you evaluate some of that secondary data that you might find, whether it's, through an interview or whether it's, something that you find online? How do you determine if it's good data, right? How do you sort of evaluate that?
Well, I think a lot of people forget what's out there. For me, I love it when I'm dealing with publicly traded companies. I've got an annual report. They've got that company by law has to report back to the government and be honest, or unless they get caught, and well, then they should have been honest to begin with. So I mean, I've got those types of sources. They go out and they speak at conferences and conventions, and you can either attend or you can get copies of it. And those are, I think, just significantly high quality sources of information. You've got government reports. Like I said, I work a lot right now with colleges and universities. So they have to report to the government for the Department of Education and all those fun things. So there's a stream of information. Public colleges at the state level have to do the same thing to their state governing bodies. Then you've got the industry analysts that follow. When I first started off in higher education, this was back in 2001, so I don't even know if Southern New Hampshire was around back then. But what I cut my teeth on getting educated on the marketplace was a guy by the name of Trace Erden, who was an analyst. Oh, I can't remember for who he was back in the day, but he was paid to educate people on what was going on in higher education so they can make decisions on whether or not to invest in the sector or not. And he had interviews with CEOs. He had insights in the companies, both public and private. It was just amazing. There were other, the vendors that we worked with were a tremendous resource. So when we hired a couple of agencies or a couple of research firms in my early days, when I was working for a couple of the universities, I was, able to pick their brains and get some knowledge and insight along those lines. There's a lot of research firms out there that will do syndicated research, where they'll go out and write the reports and then sell it to whoever wants to buy it for as much as they can get. When I started in higher education, the company up in Boston by the name of EduVentures was just a treasure trove of that. I think we paid a couple $1,000s a year for them, and we got certain reports at certain times, and we were able to understand what was going on with technology in higher education and where the for-profits were going and where the nonprofits were going. So those to me were the great resources. Then the public news coverage came in next. And then there's a couple of influencers out there as well that you learn over time. But I think with a lot of them, what I started off with in the beginning was turning to my colleagues and saying, where would you go if you had to get answers like this? And they knew who the quality sources were and steered you away from the Wikipedias and the U.S. and News reports of the time and got you to the right spot. And to be honest, typically you don't need it. It's not the volume of sources, the quantity of them, it's the quality of the ones you do get. And you can have a gold mine with 2 or 3. So it's a matter of, I think you start with the experts in the industry, your competitors, and the big conferences and trade shows, who's speaking at them. And that's where you're going to get your quality insights.
That's some really great advice and some really great ideas for finding those sort of reliable and sources that you can sort of count on. And like you said, sort of steering you away from the Wikipedia or whatever it is today that is sort of that generalized source of information. As we wrap up tonight, because I know we're just at 8:30, I just wanted to give you a chance to sort of share any sort of final thoughts or advice to our students as they're sort of working to understand and utilize market research both in our program here at SNHU, but also in their careers.
I just, I think it's really important to get to know those who are doing the research. If you're not going to go down that path and become a market researcher yourself, to get to know those people and try to understand how they do what they do and how they think and what their logic and reasoning is. Um, some of them are really, really, really good statisticians. Some of them are great at gathering data, analyzing data, and then handing you a report that tells you what the data said in terms of 15 people said yes and 7 said no. It's rare to get someone in that position that understands the business side and can then take that information and that analysis and come to you with very practical recommendations that are relevant. So getting to know how they work and what their strengths and their weaknesses are, and figuring out how you're going to work together. You know what you need to a certain degree. Make sure they clearly understand it and understand your reasoning for it, and have some give and take in that relationship, so that when they sit there and ask, make sure they're asking questions and don't be offended by it, and look at it as the two of you trying to talk yourselves through a situation to get to a place where both of you are going to benefit. Um, I've been very, very fortunate. I've worked with a few people that got the business side and were able to come out with just incredible recommendations. And I've worked with some people that began to understand the way I thought and went, oh, we can do the following things in order to answer those questions, and it'll save you some time and some money if we do it this way. And that's the kind of back and forth and relationship I think you want to strive for when you're working with someone who is a full-time market researcher. And if you go down that path, try to establish that relationship with the people in marketing. They don't get stats. They don't understand surveys. It's fun in the class, teaching the marketing research class here, when we get to the part about writing the survey for the first time. And they begin to write the questions down. And in their mind, they know exactly what they're asking. And then the fellow classmates will look at it and go, did you mean this or did you mean that? And they realize, whoa, I wrote it clear for me, but I may not have written it as clearly as I could have for them. And them are the important folks. And so you'll learn from your research partner as a marketer. So that's what I would suggest, is reach out, get to know them and build that relationship and learn their strengths and weaknesses. Let them learn yours, and together the two of you should become much more effective and successful.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. That's some great advice, and sort of a great way, I think, to wrap up. I mean, we always say in a lot of our marketing classes, right, we work with so many different people and so many different departments, right? And research is just one. That may not be your primary role,
Yep.
but understanding how to communicate with the person in that role is key. So thank you for so much to Pat for joining us tonight and lending your expertise. Thank you for those of you who joined us tonight. Really appreciated you taking the time, and we will have this coming out to you in the recording tomorrow. So thank you so much. I hope everybody has a wonderful night. Thanks again.
Night, everybody.